What's up, everybody? This is the extended book review, as I said before. And so, again, all about love, New Visions by Bell Hooks. So, like I was talking about in the first shorter book review that I posted, it was very, very short. They're always about a minute long on Snapchat. And Instagram. Um, this book, this book is good. It's a very good book. Like I said, I finished it a few weeks ago. It's a really good read. But as I'll say with all the books that I review, unless they're shorter, and even with shorter books, I am not going to be able to unpack all this book. But my main thing here is reviewing these books because, for me, I take notes. I take notes on my phone. Y'all can see. Oh, there you go. Yeah, I take notes on my phone. So I'm gonna just talk about the things that stood out to me, but hopefully you can pick things up from this book too. And if you never read the book, they're both things that you can take with you and use in your daily life, or they can be things that will attract you to read this book. And I recommend all the books I read, but this book is really good. Started it in spring, ended up finishing it earlier this summer. Great book. But anyway, let's jump into the book. So the first thing we're going to look at, and like I said, I'm not going to be able to explain everything that's in this book and unpack all of it, but I picked out certain points in the book for this book review. We're going to start at page 66. And so this first part, one of the bigger parts that kind of stood out, I'm deciding to pick out and talk about, is one of the things is when she talks about relationships. The first thing, and I think this is started is starting to be put into the mainstream, is talking about self-love. And so, one of the things she states is, one of the other books that I also read, if you'd like a self-love book, you should read a book by Sonia Renee Taylor called The Body Is Not an Apology. Great book, read that book. But she kind of goes to a similar message that I read in that book, and this part is, and it says here, it's on page 67, self-love is the foundation of our loving practice. Without it, our other efforts to love fail. And so I think that's really important because people like to jump into trying to, the action of loving and trying to love or be loved, but they don't have self-love for themselves because they don't know themselves yet well enough. And so I think that's a really important thing that she talks about in this book. Let's see. She really just goes on to talk about how you need to do this, because if you don't, you're never gonna be able to be in a good situation to receive love and then also give out love to somebody. So that's kind of the first thing that I kind of went into with this book review. Let's see, and the next thing we'll talk about, let's see, it's in the notes, is, let's see, 108. Let's see. Oh, and so one thing this book also touches on, it talks about love, but the way it sets up all these different separate discussions is so good. It's like it's really good when you're reading it because it brings in so many things. It brings in the systems of our society. It talks about the history a little bit, touches on why we think the way we do, talking about capitalistic structures, the patriarchal systems that we live in, and really how, for a lot of people they know, but how we still, even though as a society we see ourselves as getting more progressive over time, which is true, but at the same time we still push on these patriarchal things through different forms. They change basically, so it might not be as bad as they were, but they're not the same. So one thing she talks about is money, and how before we had a life where before money existed, many societies were very communal. So this idea of money has changed, and that kind of goes along with the capitalism, because the way we practice capitalism is very aggressive, and that money is what shows how successful you are. But as we know, some of the richest people in the world are some of the saddest, or some of the people who have the biggest problems in the world. And so one of the things she talks about is, confronted with a seemingly unimaginable emotional universe, some people embraced a new Protestant work ethic convinced that a successful life will be measured by how much money one made and the goods one could buy with this money. The good life was no longer to be found in community and connection. It was to be found in accumulation and the fulfillment of hedonistic, materialistic desire. And so that really just goes back to the fact of how, we focus so much on the dollar signs and, how much money we make, but we forget that the real true richness and benefit and success of us having a good life is in those connections we make with each other in the community we build. And I think that also kind of goes to speak to like the technological age that we've entered, because in some ways we're so stuck in using technology. We've disconnected ourselves with just the normal everyday interactions that were way more common, 30, 40 years ago, but they have disappeared over time. And we just use the technology to connect with each other rather than meeting up with somebody or just calling and talking to somebody on the phone. I mean, for me, I love to call and talk to people on the phone. That's nice. I'd rather do that than necessarily just text back and forth, because it's just more of a connection, even though as much of a connection you can have with not being in the same place as a person. So there's that part. And then we go over to the next thing she kind of talks about is kind of going back also with money is the culture of greed. So not only does money exist, but we're so greedy. The culture of greed validates and legitimizes her worship of money. It is not all interested in her emotional growth. Who cares if she ever knows love? And so in this excerpt that I just read, she's talking about a specific situation with a woman, but the thing is that the attention which should be paid on that person, in this case it's a woman, should be the love, and how the love, like the love for herself, and then the love that she's trying to find, and then the love she's trying to receive and give. It's not being concentrated because we're more concentrated. It's not concentrated on that. It's more concentrated on greed. And again, leading back to the idea of capitalism. And the thing is that yes, capitalism is a society that has helped a lot of people, but at the same time, why are we so concentrated on money? Because it wasn't like that for the majority of human history. It has not been concentrated on money. Money in the grand scheme of history, or since the Homo species has been alive, hasn't been here for has only been here for a small chunk of it. So I think that's something people should keep in mind too. Just because we live in a society the way it is now, it hasn't always been like that. So let's see, and then we go to 140, and let's see. Here we go. So I had to catch where I was. This one is very good because one of the things she talks about is and this kind of goes back to self-love, is that many of us look for somebody to be with because we feel lonely. And when you're by yourself, you shouldn't feel lonely, but instead she talks about, and she uses examples from another book, but the fact that you shouldn't feel lonely, you should feel a sense of solitude. And so, in one of the excerpt that she uses, um, here we go. She's quoting from another book when she's writing this in her book, but this is what it reads. The difficult road is the road of conversion, the conversion from loneliness into solitude. Instead of running away from our loneliness and trying to forget or deny it, we have to protect it and turn it into fruitful solitude. Loneliness is painful, solitude is peaceful. Loneliness makes us cling to others in desperation. Solitude allows us to respect others in a uniqueness and create community. And then she goes on to say, when children are taught to enjoy quiet time, to be alone with their thoughts and reveries, they carry the skill into adulthood. Individuals, young and old, striving to overcome fears of being alone, often choose meditation practice as a way to embrace solitude. So this is a very important idea because, even for me, um, I mean, I like to be, as people who are watching this know me personally, they know I like to talk to people, they know I like to be sociable. I also like to be alone. I like to read. I like to do other things by myself. But the thing is that, even for me, it's still a journey of trying to get to that. Nobody's ever going to be perfect. No human being can reach that, and striving for perfection is an ideal we have, but nobody's ever going to be perfect in the sense of getting to that that state of solitude. But there are a lot of people who are comfortable being like that, and you see people who are not. They feel very lonely. They need to be with somebody all the time, whether that's a friend, whether that's trying to be in a relationship with somebody. And I think it's just a very important point to bring out, because we don't think about that. Are you able to get yourself in a state of solitude before you enter a relationship? Because if you're not, you might be using that person as a crutch to make sure you're not lonely. And lonely is a lot different than solitude. As she states from the other book that she's quoting, solitude is peaceful. Solitude is being at one with yourself in that moment. And if you're not, that can have bad effects on the relationship with whoever you get into. And if you have a partner, that can not only make small problems start to compound and build up to a bigger climax, but it also can harm the other person, because you're leaning on them so much for a crutch to be able to make sure that they're there so you don't feel lonely. And so I think that's one of the big ideas for me I took away from this book, just to keep thinking about. Not to say I'd never thought about it before, but when you're reading it, you're like, oh man, like that's a really good point. And so, if you're out there listening, find your place of solitude if you feel lonely, and don't try to use somebody to fill in that empty loneliness space that you have. You need to try to find that that sense of solitude and that place of solitude, because that's when you'll be able to be the best version of yourself and be in a relationship with somebody else, or just have a positive effect on all the relationships, whether that's intimate, friendships, family relationships, things like that. So let's see. Okay, the next one. Well, like I said, a lot of good stuff in this book. Just like so many connections, and all centered around the message of love. Um, uh, the other thing she talks about is this kind of goes back to the way societal norms that we have. And she talks about a lot of it specifically in the United States, but also like a broader version of it globally. She says that to know love, we must surrender our attachment to sexist thinking in whatever form it takes in our lives. That attachment will always return us to gender conflict, a way of thinking about sex roles that diminishes females in males. And so the thing that's important to this point is that we do talk about sexism and the fact that obviously we live in a male-dominated society, but both sexism and having these sexist thoughts about gender roles hurt both males and females. Now, like I said, males dominate the society we've lived in because they've always been the top gender between the two. But the other thing is that it hurts males because they have been societally coached. I mean, there are outside influences, but even at home, a lot of people are coached to be like, if you're male, you hide your emotions, you don't cry, you don't express anything, you just bury it deep down inside, and you'll get over it eventually. You don't show that you're hurt. You need to put on your poker face and act like nothing happened. And so that's how we see, and these are over the last few years, these subjects have been talked about a lot, and so we see it happening, that discussion happening more and more and more. But it's not, when she's talking about the specific idea of sexism and being sexist. She's saying that we have to be careful because that's directed more at trying to make sure that we don't put women into gender roles as like housewives, taking care of the kids, being being a stay-at-home mom. That men at the same time also have to break down those barriers. So you don't have to be the breadwinner. You don't have to be earning the most money ever. You don't have to be the head of the household, because those roles should be fluid. They shouldn't be set in stone as they have been in our society for so long. They still exist in many ways today, even though there's been progress towards it, but there's a lot of work to go. So that's the one thing she talks about, breaking out of that sexist mind frame. And everybody does it, even, some people are better at getting out of it than others, but it's so hard to break out of the societal thought that has been pushed on us, That's one thing she talks about too, is that you can have the most progressive parents raise a kid, and society will still push those societal gender roles on them, and sexism attacks kids that way into a certain train of thought. So, all right, I'm gonna skip ahead, and this is probably one of my favorite. I think one of the big pillars of this book that I really liked. So one of the things she also talks about, I don't think I'm going to read an excerpt from the book about it, but she talks about the act of loving. And she just says that a lot of us, we just don't know. And the thing is there's a difference between love and loving. The action of loving is very intentional, and we have to be careful because if you end up reading this book, you'll see what she's talking about. But there are certain ways that we're taught to love, but sometimes those ways we're taught to love are abusive. But we don't know any different because that's the only exposure we have had to loving. So we'll see sometimes parents who get in arguments with each other, and they can be very, very bad verbal arguments. Those people might be, to a child, they might be showing love because they care so much to have the argument, but it's very toxic, and that's not what we want our kids to be able to. We don't want the kids to carry that forward. So that's the kind of thing she talks about, is you have to learn how to be loving. It's not just about giving love and receiving love, but the action itself as a verb of loving is very important. And that was very, very, big for me, because I was like, I never really thought about it that way, but it is very, very true when you look at it. But the other thing that kind of connects with what I'm going to talk about is the distinction between heart connections and soul connections. And so she takes some of an excerpt from this author called John Wellwood. In this book, he called it "Love and Awakening: Discovering the Sacred Path of Intimate Relationship." Um, and he makes the distinction between a soul connection and a heart connection as this: a soul connection is a resonance between two people who respond to the essential beauty of each other's individual natures behind their facades, and who connect on a deeper level. This kind of mutual recognition provides the catalyst for a potent alchemy. It is a sacred alliance whose purpose is to help both partners discover and realize their deepest potentials. While a heart connection lets us appreciate those we love just as they are, a soul connection opens up a further dimension, seeing and loving them for who they could be and for who we could become under their influence. Making a heart connection with someone is usually not a difficult process. And so in that paragraph, that last paragraph wasn't part of the quote she pulled from his book, but basically heart connections is what we see on the surface and what we kind of fall in love with or we really like about a person. But the thing is a soul connection is being able, as you heard in the quote, to being able to get past that facade. Now, when I was reading this book, I was reading at a time when I was kind of thinking about things with relationships in my life or a specific relationship. And so the one thing that she did say is that this soul connection is kind of the thing that we kind of look for, and we're like, wow, this is the person that we're going to be with. This person can be really great. But the thing is that even though the soul connection is so good, and it's like you can see through the person, and you have that like energy between you two, that's not always the person that you're going to end up with. And that's what was like, she tells her story about this guy that she saw, and she was like, this is the one. They go out to dinner and everything, and they were just friendly. This was like their first time. And he's like, well, actually, I'm married. He's like, I thought we were just going out to dinner as friends. And so she just says, like, these soul connections, you might run into them. You can run into them once, twice, 4 or 5 times, but that's not necessarily the person you're going to be with. Now, heart connections are easy to make because you're taking the person for face of value. You haven't gotten to that soul connection or gone past who they are and deeper into their personal life and stuff like that. But that doesn't mean that a heart connection can't turn into a soul connection. But those soul connections are just so deep, and you just hit it off like that. But it's important to realize that might not be the person that you end up with. And so her story was very like interesting to me because she's not sitting up here selling this idea like you find a soul connection and that's it. But it's like you might think this is great and it may be really great, but that might not be the person you end up with, and that could happen multiple times in your life. So I know for me that was really interesting. She talks about it for She talks about it for about 4 pages, and so it was a really good section of the book that like really hit home for me. So the last thing she talks in the book, and this is the last thing I'll give to you, she talks about death and how death has a very, 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 you know, people think about death, but if you think about death in terms of love, I don't think people really think about it in the way she talks about it in the book. Death has a very influential way of affecting how we see life, how we see life, how we go about our time here in this life, and then also how that relates to love. So one of the things she says is, she said, let's see, I don't think, one of the big things she said, love empowers us to live fully and die well. Death becomes then not an end to life, but a part of living. And then she talks about another author who she talks about death in this way. So she says, in these earliest days of what would become known as the birth of thanatology, or the study of death, my greatest teacher was a black cleaning woman. I do not remember her name, but what drew my attention to her was the effect that she had on many of the most seriously ill patients. Each time she left their rooms, I noticed a tangible difference in their attitudes. I wanted to know her secret. Desperately curious, a literary spy on this woman who had never finished high school but knew a big secret. The secret that this wise black woman knew, which Kubler-Ross positively appropriated, was that we must befriend death and let it be our guide in life, meeting it unafraid. When the black cleaning lady who had triumphed over many hardships in her own life, who had lost her loved ones to early death, entered the rooms of the dying, she brought with her a willingness to talk openly about death without fear. This nameless angel gave Kubler-Ross the most valuable lesson of her life, telling her, death is not a stranger to me. He is an old, old acquaintance. It takes courage to befriend death. We find that courage in life. Through loving. And so I was just like, wow, it was super deep and a different way to think about death, because people, I think, fear death. And it's not maybe for people who are like my age, because I'm only 23, but when you get later in life, you start thinking about like, man, like, I'm getting old, that's around the corner, and you get there and you're like, dang, it's right here. But just thinking about that way is just way different. I think it's really good, because the more accepting we can be of death, the more we're allowed to live our lives without having to worry about what's going to happen in the future. And then the last thing I think I'll leave you all with, having my notes, let's see, she gets a quote from somebody. It's from a monk, I think. Here it is. Got it. I'll leave you with this. The only way to live that life, oh, hang on. Oh, sorry, here we go. I'll start from here. Understanding that death is always with us can serve as a faithful reminder that the time to do what we feel called to do is always now, and not in some distant and unimagined future. Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh teaches in Our Appointment with Life that we find our true selves by living fully in the present. To return to the present is to be in contact with life. Life can be found only in the present moment, because the past no longer is and the future has not yet come. Our appointment with life is in the present moment. The place of our appointment is right here, in this very place. Living in a culture that is always encouraging us to plan for the future is no easy task to develop the capacity to be here now. So I'll leave you all with that, and that just all that together, that was just all that last part about death was just very interesting. Never really thought about it that way. It gave me a different perspective, but also allows me to have a different outlook on that idea of death, and try to spread that idea around rather than people being fearful of it. Because if you let death be the driver to why you're not doing things, or you're constantly thinking about it, you're never going to live your life. And you really should be. You can only control being in the present, because that's what the moment you're in now, and not focus so much on the future, and don't worry about what's happened in the past. So that's all I have for y'all. Sorry, I try to keep these videos to about 20-ish minutes. This ran over a little bit. If you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments below, and let me know. And if y'all know me personally, just message me. Give me any suggestions. Tell me what you think. Thank you for watching. And I'm going to have another book that I'm going to be reviewing shortly. It's a short book about poetry, so you hopefully see that really soon on the YouTube channel or wherever I post it on social media. So thanks for watching, and I hope you all go read All About Love, New Visions, because I think everybody should read this book, and love is a very important subject in our life. So again, thanks for watching, and have a good night or day wherever you are right now.